I'm with Grander Capital Partners.
Oh, okay. All right. I know Jeff very well.
Yeah, just
Tell him
got off the phone with him.
Well, tell him I'm thinking of him.
I will.
Jumped right in.
Has your tour activity died down to nothing?
Nothing. Yeah, nobody's allowed to tour at this point. So unfortunately.
I have one prospect that wants to take a tour, and this is actually the topic of our conversation. I'm like, I'm trying to abide by the rules, but oh, that's perfect. Kim is coming on at the perfect time. Hey, Kim. I don't know if she can hear us, but they're insisting. They're like, well, can you take a tour with maybe a limited number of people? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. Hey, Kim, how are you?
How are y'all?
All right, good to see you.
You as well. This is pretty high tech.
Yeah. I have to tell you guys, these at first I was really, really excited to see other people on these Zoom videos, and now I'm just getting overwhelmed. Yeah. Miss Espenshade, how are you? She's like, I'm waving at you, Chris.
It's a second to connect to the audio. I guess.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
You guys, I'm sitting in front of a window and the sun is right there. I can't do anything about it. Do I have an angelic appearance?
You do.
You're glowing.
You are glowing.
These are like transition glasses, so I've got them on so that I'm not blinded by the sun. So one of these things is not like the other. That would be my new junior broker, Austin Harrington.
Morning, everyone.
You joined the team. Abby, are you alive? She's frozen again.
Yeah.
Hey, Abby.
Internet connections for sure.
And it keeps scratching her. We get the best faces when the screen freezes from her. So what's everybody doing today? Having any fun?
Staring at this screen all day long.
Morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Kelsey.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So Kim, what's you guys are totally shut down in your buildings, or are you letting essential employees in?
We're here. Most of the tenants have at least one person here. Some have up to 10, depending on what their business is. We only have one tenant who is not allowing anyone to come in. But we're down to like 6 or 7% of building occupancy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's pretty, it's like a ghost town.
So Kim, I haven't been downtown in 3 weeks. Is it the streets pretty abandoned? Is it a ghost town?
It is a ghost town. About the only good thing is traffic is like non-existent. So you can get anywhere you want to go really fast.
Yeah.
I heard they're repairing the streets too, taking this opportunity to repair the streets.
Oh, I have not seen that, but then I only go certain routes.
Good morning, Michelle.
I've seen that too, and I think they're closing the tunnel.
They're closing the tunnel. Wow.
Did I just see that yesterday?
Well,
let me say this.
If they are indeed doing that, kudos for somebody making the right management decision for the first time ever to repair the roads at a strategic time.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Although, who knows where they're getting the funds to do it, but at least it's getting done.
Oh, yeah, I live in Canton, and there are a lot of folks walking around, probably only 7 or 8% wearing masks right now, but just walking along the promenade and in through some of the neighborhoods right around the water.
Yeah, Riverside, and there were a bunch of people in the park yesterday. Nobody's wearing masks, so.
Yeah, I'm over in Locust Point, and behind Under Armour, it was like a gymnasium during a basketball game. all the athletes in the community were out and about.
I want to introduce you guys really quick to Leetai. Leetai, if you want to give a wave. Lita is with Harkins. She is planning on joining Crew as soon as we're all allowed to come back to work. But very interested. We were on a happy hour call on Friday with our team members, and she was super interested in the virtual space. So I invited her to this call.
Hello, everyone.
Lita, welcome.
Thank you.
I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So I am going to mute everybody for now and start the recording. This is going to be recorded. And then we will be able to, and then Terri and Abby and Chris and Katherine, if you will just unmute yourselves as we get rolling. I think that's going to be the best way to do this. So good morning again. Thank you so much for being here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Kristen Schrader with Harkins Builders, the Commercial Business Development Manager and your 2020 Crew Board President. So this is our second webinar. The first one went really well, and the request was to keep this going. So I'm going to try and schedule these out through the end of May for now. Hopefully we're allowed to get back together in June, but I imagine we're going to be doing this into June as well. So any ideas, thoughts, trends are welcome. If you want to have a panel on it, if you're getting asked questions and you just want to invite the greater population of Crew, we've got a lot of smart women in our chapter, and I'm trying to host these with Crew members for now. If we need to bring in other industry experts, we can certainly explore that. So again, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to run through our sponsors. To have our sponsors this year particularly is, I mean, a blessing in disguise. Again, we've got no money coming in, so you guys are keeping our chapter running. So our gold sponsors: Harkins Builders, JLL, Miles and Stockbridge. Our silver sponsors: Absolute Services Industries, Cone Resnick, Copt, Crammon and Graham, Badova Engineering, Rosenberg, Martin and Greenberg, the Brick Companies, and the Rockefeller Group. Our bronze sponsors: All Safe Elevator Inspections, Sonero, Charm City Concierge, Grade Line Construction Company, Howard Bank, Infinity Environmental, Katz Abosh, Land Care, Merritt Companies, Mona Electric Group, My Cleaning Service, Omega Fire and Life Safety, Penza Bailey Architects, Price Modern, Rupert Landscape, Tyson Krupp Elevator, Unlimited Restoration, VSC Fire and Security, and Whiteford Taylor Preston. Thank you so much again to all of our annual sponsors. Today's webinar is going to be on brokers, the virtual tour, and a little bit on blockchain. I think we did a call yesterday, and I think you guys are all going to find this pretty fascinating. So our speakers today: Terri Harrington with MacKenzie Commercial, Chris Espenshade with Newmark, Grubb, Knight and Frank, Abby Glassberg with CBRE, and Katherine Pinkard with Pinkard Properties. Ladies, take it away.
So good morning, everyone. How is everyone today? Sure, just like they were the last 3 weeks. So we did start a discussion yesterday, and actually I'm going to point to Chris. Where are you in the middle there? Because I think, Chris, you kind of kicked us off yesterday talking about the efficiencies that you have in your multifamily world. And I think it would be great to explain to everybody here what those efficiencies are so that the rest of us can join in and a little bit talk about some of the inefficiencies that we're experiencing.
Oh, we can't
Chris,
hear you.
I think you're muted, Chris.
And also, if you guys have questions, please type them in the chat box, and I will do my best to get those out to the.
And do you want us to also give backgrounds on who we are and what we do to help kind of frame the discussion too?
Yep, sure.
All right, can you
So
hear me
Chris,
now?
Yes, we can. Wonderful.
Got it. I actually tried to use an earpiece to be effective, but clearly that didn't work. So I'll go ahead and follow Katherine's lead too. I'm Chris Espenshade. I'm a vice chairman at Newmark, Knight Frank. I run our multifamily investment sales platform based in Washington, but I live in Baltimore. My team covers all of Baltimore Maryland and DC, covering financing and sales of apartment buildings. I've been with Newmark about 7 months. Previously was with JLL for 9 years. Have been a member of CREWBaltimore for a period of time. So again, it is great to see everybody, because it's, I think, as I sit here in my athleisure wear and this is my dressy sweater. It'll be nice to kind of, reconnect with people as we get through this. During our call yesterday, we talked a little bit about the differences in dealing with our businesses virtually, and how my business in the multifamily space probably leans a little bit more towards the residential than it does the traditional commercial side. And that from an operations perspective, our clients are certainly seeing a decrease in tour volume and inquiries and leases. And I think that's probably more of an economic indicator. But our clients very quickly have been able to pivot and essentially do their entire business remotely. And a lot of that is just fueled by virtual tours, because people have realized it's pretty easy to take a video of what an apartment looks like in its common space, its amenity space, and its interior space. And a resident has a pretty good idea of what they're ultimately going to get at the end of the day. And I think, the other part of that is the economic impact to an individual renter is different. You are making a 1-year commitment to live someplace rather than a 10+ year, multi-$1,000 commitment. So I would say, the other challenge people have realized is, how do you ultimately let someone see the space? And there's a technology some of you may be familiar with if you've done a digital check-in at a Hilton or some other Hampton Inn type hotel, where you can actually use your phone as a digital key. Landlords have been adapting that as actual key to enter a model or a vacant unit. You can set a period of time, there's a QR code, you download that, and you as a tenant can actually go see that space. So again, for once, the multifamily business is a little bit ahead of the curve. We tend to not to have been that way. And one of the things I think that Terry's going to talk about, at the end of the conversation is, how does this impact our businesses post-pandemic? What are we learning from this that's ultimately going to help us change and make us better brokers and commercial real estate professionals? Because I do believe in the multifamily business, you're going to see a complete change in on-site staffing as this kind of runs through the system.
I'll jump in from there. My name is Terri Harrington. I'm a Senior Vice President with MacKenzie Commercial Real Estate. I do tenant representation and representation of landlords in a lot of these buildings that you see behind me. Some of my listings are the World Trade Center, which is 401 East Pratt Street, 36 South Charles Street, the Harbor Court building. And when Chris was telling me about the technology that she uses in her industry, or her part of the industry, it really left me feeling like we are really inadequate on the office side. We obviously are not taking tours, showing our properties, because in a lot of cases we are not essential employees and are not supposed to be going in. And we're kind of left with a situation whereby we're having to piecemeal the information we're sending out to prospects. I think we're way behind the curve on this one, because we've taken pictures of spaces that the vacancies that people have requested to see, and we're sending out pictures, but we have nothing like the technology that is out there in the multifamily world. So our hands are a little bit tied at this point. I think people are patient with this, but the question is, how much longer will they be patient with our industry on the office side being a little bit behind the times in terms of technology? And I don't think it's just my firm. I think it's prevalent across the entire commercial real estate sector when it comes to office leasing. I'm not seeing other agents sending out videos of their spaces, virtual tours and such. Do you want to jump in there, Abby? Somebody I heard say something, but Abby, it looks like you might be frozen up again, so I'll continue unless you want to jump in. But in listening to what Chris is saying,
hey,
are you there? Yep.
Yeah, sorry. So since our call yesterday and in preparation, I've talked to a lot of different people. So one thing that is changing is, when this first started, we were all able to work from home quite quickly. And then we're finding, so the first 2 weeks, for thinking, will we ever need office space again? But as this has progressed, it shows that companies have found that we do need to be together. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom for our industry. I talked to Karen Cherry yesterday from Howard Hughes, and she thought, she said that she doesn't believe the change, there'll be a lot of change in showing office space. There's nothing like walking through the space, no matter how good the online is. Tenants will always want to understand the ideas that don't come across online. So,
Hey, Abby, we lost you again. But I'm just going to pick up here, and Abby, you just jump in when you can. But to Abby's point, I think we're all feeling like we do want to get back into the office, and we've been fielding a lot of calls about will office space be as desired in the future as it is has been in the past, and I think we
Well, Terri, here's
a
a question for you. Do you think that, given that people have been working remotely, right? And I would say there's a lot of Class B or worse office space, very suburban, that might have been bill processing, call center, purely support. Do you think that mix changes at all as we reemerge from this, either from a cost perspective?
Well, I have heard from a couple of law firms where in the past they've not had as many people in the support role working from home who have now figured out how to work from home. The attorneys with whom they work are more accepting of the fact that they can now do work long distance and not face to face. And as a result, I've heard that some firms are giving the support staff the opportunity to work from home some days of the week, as opposed to having to go to the office every day of the week. And therefore, the number of offices they need for the support staff could possibly decrease, because then they're rotating through a smaller number of offices. So I think that things could change along those lines. But going back to the topic that we're discussing, I think as we come through this, we're going to see some changes, because as we sit here, we never anticipated, in the commercial real estate business, being at home and trying to lease our properties. And I think we need to figure out a way to be more progressive in our world to get on board with technology and be able to show what we do remotely. Now, we did talk a little bit yesterday about, and Katherine, you might want to jump in here. I think you made this point, do we become less relevant if we do start to use more technology, and how much do we integrate technology into our world to the extent that we're not as relevant, because we don't need to be there to show the spaces, and we don't need to be there to do the paperwork. And I think, at the end of the call yesterday, we all concluded there definitely is a need for us as humans in this process. But I think to move this to Katherine, she can speak a little bit about some technology that our industry still is not using. This is not only on the virtual tour side, but on the paperwork side of our business.
Sure. And my apologies in advance. If you hear what sounds like a violin in the background, it's my Basset Hound puppies who are not pleased that they were not invited to this webinar, despite a long walk this morning. So I, unlike Abby and Chris and Terri, I'm not out there as a broker, but rather kind of running a services company focused largely around asset and property management. But as some on the call may know, one of my big passions that I'm kind of working in the space is blockchain technology for commercial real estate. And for those that don't know, blockchain is kind of a very new technology. It's the kind of makings behind Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, but it's also used in three main areas in commercial real estate. I will spare kind of the big long tutorial on what blockchain is. I've done some writings for CREW before on it. You can find articles that I've written about what blockchain is, but suffice it to say that blockchain is a technology that creates kind of efficiencies where, we talked about on our call yesterday, where humans don't add value in a process. I think real estate's it's a physical asset, right? And it depends on where it is in our physical world. And there's always going to be a human element to that. We can't replace that with technology. But I think we can add in technology to kind of leverage and create efficiencies where we can. So one of the big areas in blockchain that I'm excited, you have to look at the silver lining. Maybe this whole crisis that we're living through is an opportunity to kind of push to the forefront is blockchain. They're called smart contracts used for leasing. So instead of having a paper lease that we, the tenant and the landlord each have a copy of, you would have a digital smart contract where all of the lease terms, whether it's, it's a 5-year term with 3 months of free rent, X dollars tenant improvement allowance, whatever the kind of material deal terms are in that lease, are all digitally encoded in the smart contract. That can then feed into a property management accounting system or lease administration system to kind of execute on some of those terms automatically. So instead of me having to have a lease administrator manually load into the system, on March 1st every year, the rent bumps 3%. It would, because we signed the contract digitally, that would all just automatically flow into the system. So in theory, it could create a lot of efficiencies that would carry long beyond kind of this era that we're in now. But maybe is this the impetus for people to realize, wow, this really would be something that could make my business be ready and more apt to survive kind of rough times like this, should we go through something like this again?
Catherine, one thing I didn't ask you yesterday, in leasing office space, our contracts for leasing the space go through many rounds of negotiations. And it's back and forth with revisions, maybe as many as 5 to 10 times. How does blockchain come into play in that situation?
Sure. So you wouldn't execute on the digital contract until you came to those final terms. So you're not going to execute a contract all the way along that keeps getting amended. It will be the final deal terms. But what if you need to amend that? What if you want to push the commencement date because the tenant improvements are taking too long, or some other kind of agreement between the two parties to change any of the deal terms or amend the lease? That's absolutely possible. Blockchain creates this kind of immutable, unchangeable ledger of the transaction. So you can't go back and change that transaction. You would simply add to it and create another transaction. So there's this very clean kind of legal chain that you can follow all the way along as to how that changed. But that it's absolutely possible. And this gets into the kind of technicalities of blockchain, but the entire, let's say it's 40-page lease document, that's not all necessarily stored on the blockchain. But kind of a marker of that contract or the core deal terms can be, which then would point you to something off chain that may be the whole document. So there's a lot of efficiency there, and you absolutely can kind of change things along the way if you need to. And I should underscore that this, in theory, is technologically possible, but has not yet been adopted by our industry. So I can't show you, this landlord in New York or in California has done this. They're working towards it. There are some smart contract-based leases for like a WeWork type space, like Rent-A-Desk, Schrader. They're more usually like license agreements. They're working towards it in residential where the leases are more standardized because of fair housing. You're not going to get really custom deal terms from one residential tenant to another like you might in an office lease. So this does not yet exist. We're still working towards enterprise level adoption, but it is, the technology exists and kind of is possible if we can get the industry to move that direction.
I'm smiling because I'm just thrilled that one of my landlords uses DocuSign, and that is progressive in my mind, as opposed to having to take the lease in to have the tenant sign it, get 2 copies, deliver it all around the place, and now we've got DocuSign being used, which is to me, a technology we hadn't used in the past.
Right.
Excuse me, not everybody, excuse me, has adopted it. But it is something that, again, in these times where we are, not able to see each other face to face, we've been able to at least use some technology to get business done. Abby, you want to jump back in again?
Sure. Maybe I'm stepping too far back, but as brokers, even if we do adopt technology, we still have a place. There's still market intel, there's still critical advice. So I don't think that we will be not needed for a long time to come. And you'll see, even with virtual tours from our residential friends, that it's really the first tour, so they still have to walk through it. So I think maybe instead of seeing 15 buildings with technology, like Merritt uses Matterport for their Class A vacancies for the nicer buildings. So we already are seeing some of that technology. They own the camera and they can do it. There's a lot of 3D modeling, which is used in residential or multifamily and new construction of office and retail. I mean, we do have to also split our industry. The industrial guys, if you show them the truck port, the floor load, and the column spacing, they have a pretty good idea of what they're doing. But in office space, I still think you're going to need to walk through it. And an interesting thing with technology is smell. Have you ever thought you loved a building, walked through and either smelled a musty smell or that lobby shop?
Or the bread at the Subway below.
Yeah. So sometimes, it's those things that we will need to get in. Will we do something different? I've always I'm a suburban broker primarily, and I like the time in the car. I don't like it when my customers follow me because there's a lot of discussion that happens in the car. But maybe going forward, they will always follow us.
Well, and we talked yesterday, I am not an advocate of releasing, all of our information out there like the residential world does. So you will see on the multiple list when any of us is looking for a home, you can see the virtual tours. You can find anything you want in terms of comps. I think you brought that up yesterday, Abby. It's just a whole different world. And as Chris pointed out, we're doing 10-year leases worth multiple millions of dollars. So I think we need to exercise a little bit more control than we see on the residential side of the business, where they are far more progressive in their technology. But I think a lot gets done outside of being one-on-one. They have form contracts, and the form contracts are not altered to any great extent. That's not the case in our world. We are constantly revising the contracts, negotiating terms. And so I think we have to be transparent to a certain extent, but I also don't think that given what we do, we don't have everything that we can present in a transparent manner at the start of somebody's interest in one of our properties or spaces. And Kim, I'm going to put you on the spot, Kim Hogan. She's probably, she's looking at me like, what? I mean, Kim works with COPT and has several office buildings. And I'm just curious as to your opinion as somebody who manages these assets, how do you feel about technology, and is COPT doing anything to be more progressive in terms of showing their spaces in the buildings?
So even if we embrace technology in a lot of things, to my knowledge, we don't use it when we're talking about showing spaces. We haven't done it here on Under Light. But again, bear in mind that we work through Cushman & Wakefield here. And to my knowledge, they have not suggested that we do something like that. I think as a teaser, it would be good, but I also think that people need to actually see the space, see where they would be located, see what their view is. Again, see, smell what's going on. And there's so much more than just the space that they're looking at. It's the surrounding area, it's the lobby, it's how do they feel with the security, just different impressions even on their way up to their space. So we haven't embraced it, but again, I don't know that you can really get a full sense of what the building and space is like unless you come in person.
No, I would agree with that. And I think, we talked a little yesterday about maybe this reduces the number of tire kickers. I think in our industry, whether you're a leasing broker, property management, any part of, we all know tire kickers, right? We all know people who love to tour and love to get a market overview, and they love to get another bid from a third contractor. And at the end of the day, we do it because it's a long-term relationship thing. but it doesn't really make us all a lot of money. I do think this whole process can make us all more efficient in what we do, right? I do think the tire kickers are going to kind of be moved to the side. We're going to be able to conduct the first 80% of that conversation virtually. Hey, here's a map. This is, what the building has done, and let's narrow it down to 3. Right. And maybe again, to Abby's point, we're not going to ever travel in a car with our clients again, but meet me at these places, meet the property manager. And I do believe that if any of us don't adopt a new way of doing things more efficiently, that's going to be the end of us. Right. That this is a time that we need to, hey, what can we do to be more cost effective and better connect with people? Because let's be clear, our asset manager clients are going through the same thing. They've got to, continue their business or run their businesses, right? And deal with the fact that they can't pay rent, downsizing people, whatever. We've got to change our business so it's easier for them to work with us.
To play devil's advocate a little bit.
What's that?
So to play devil's advocate a little bit, why is it that we in the commercial world are so afraid of data transparency? So what I like about blockchain is that if it's a public blockchain, you can have private permissioned blockchains, which we talked about a little yesterday, but on a public blockchain, there's a record of that transaction. So I can see just the base deal terms. It was a 5-year lease at this rental rate, this kind of TI, the kind of the basics. And I feel like having that access to data would prevent a lot of tire kicking, and people could see, oh God, that's out of my price range. That's not where I want to be. I still have to go. I want to smell it. I got to get the feel for it. Who else is on the hallway where I'm going to be renting space? But our kind of lack of data transparency, I think, is just centered around, no, but you have to call me. But I will call you, but I'm going to call you when I need you and you add value. But if I have access to data and can make some decision makings, I'm going to call you. The broker's going to make more money on real transactions. The landlord saves money on having to chase people down for things. I think we need to move towards a greater level of data transparency in commercial leasing. It would make a big difference.
Well, it depends on what data, because we're all as brokers trying to get our hands on comps, because we're not transparent with comps, and we are prohibited in a lot of cases to be transparent with comps. We can't be out there disseminating how we got a deal done on behalf of our owners, so that everybody, gets the same terms, because the deal terms are different. Somebody might need $80 in tenant improvement money. Somebody might need $30, and then somebody sees that tenant got 80 and they want 80 when they only really need 30, and it's just complicated. Pardon me?
Sure.
And plus, they might not have the credit. Just all tenants are not created equal.
It's a lot of moving parts, and I'm going to have Michelle Cohen jump in here because she deals with this as well. I'm really good at calling people out when they just want to sit back and relax. But all of my REITs, I sign in my listing agreement that I will keep this information confidential, and giving out information on behalf of my owners is not my place to do it. It's their information. It's not mine. So it's much different, to your point, Katherine, in residential, where you buy a house and it goes into the public record. But it's very different in that it could become really complicated if everybody is always seeing the terms that another tenant gets and trying to negotiate off those numbers.
But why? And I'm again, this is a fun dialogue to have. I'm just kind of pushing back of why is that? Because, when I buy a house, I can account for, you just see the price, and I bought the house and it has 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, but it may have an Italian marble fireplace, or there are nuanced things in buying a house too that you may not be able to account for just on those kind of like core data points that I look up online. It's just a bigger scale in commercial, and it's not all in the brokers, of course. A lot of times it's the owner saying, I don't want you to disclose this data. And that's an easy thing to solve, right? It has to be all of a sudden everybody.
Residential, most people understand residential. The same reason why we don't really have a lot of form contracts, because and again, I'm going to have Michelle jump in here, because it's far more complicated. A lot of people don't understand how the commercial world works.
No, I'll interject quickly though. So we're all work in disclosure states. So Katherine's point about disclosing a house value, any one of us can look and see exactly what 500 East Pratt traded for. Every large commercial transaction is also available. So going back to that, is people look at me and say, well, Chris, why do I need you to tell me what the value of this building is? I know the building next door traded for $50 million. Well, yes, but it's fully renovated. Yes, it has a tax abatement. There's still a value in having a broker and having an expert there, but transparency actually just makes my job easier. I actually know 100% what all the buildings have traded for, so I have data to back up my opinions of value. So I think that's where you can flip it on its side and be like, hey, this can be helpful.
I think certain things leading up to it should be transparent. I mean, I get really frustrated when I do an office search and none of the office buildings have their rental rates listed. I've established a policy whereby my landlords say it's okay. I've got my rental rates on my office buildings right in CoStar, but a lot of brokers waste my time because I have to call up and say, what are you quoting today? Michelle, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so if I could jump in for a second.
Yeah, and then Michelle, could I say something when you're done?
Yeah, so just following up on some of the questions that were posed, and it's kind of interesting, because I wrote an article myself about blockchain uses in real estate. It was posted on Crew National's website, I guess, sometime last year. But that is a big barrier to the use of full use of blockchain in commercial real estate, is its reluctance by parties to disclose confidential information. And Terri is absolutely right. Leases that I sign, letters of intent that I negotiate, listing agreements usually do have confidentiality clauses. So if you're going to put information out there in the public sector, you've got to get permission to do that. And I think also, you know, maybe like, for example, Terri, I know you talked about rental rates being listed publicly, but a lot of times those get negotiated. And I don't know that landlords necessarily always want the public or other prospective tenants to know the deals that they've cut, because it changes a lot, right, depending on all sorts of factors. So maybe the issue is reaching some sort of consensus in the industry on the types of information that would be appropriate to disclose publicly, because I agree with Katherine. The uses of blockchain in commercial real estate, I think, are fascinating. Katherine, I became interested in it after seeing something you wrote a while back, and it's something I've been following. It ties to a lot of my practice areas of interest. But we've got to get through that hurdle, because, of course, one of the key components of blockchain is trustworthiness. If the chain isn't trusted, people can't use it. Okay, I'm done. Abby, your turn.
Oh, yeah. Can I just take one step back? And the difference on buying a house is that you can come and show me that you got a mortgage. So all the people interested are the same because they can prove that they can have a mortgage. But like what Terri was saying earlier about comps is, and why some landlords don't want them to know, the credit worthiness, the amount of TI, and when they came in the leasing cycle of the building, did they need to have a loss leader to get somebody in? But credit and how much TI and length of term are all very important. And that's why I can't give everybody the same exact deal.
But there's technology solutions for that too. I was just approached by a startup they're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to submit financials, and they spit it back out to the landlord like that, their analysis of whether they think you're credit worthy or not. So if a lot of this, like, technology is trying to catch up with some of those processes, that Abby's right, it's going to be so different for each commercial lender, but it's really cool to see technology trying to address a lot of these problems to help make us more efficient.
Yeah, and frankly, I mean, I'd love to be more efficient, and I'm probably giving the impression that I've got my arms around this so tightly and I don't want to let go, which I've been doing this 20 some years, and I think I'm probably more progressive in thinking and using technology than a lot of my colleagues. But at the same time, you don't want to lose your relevance. But I think there's a fine line between getting information out there and getting into a process that makes you more efficient, as opposed to completely making the process less person to person. And I think what we're hearing in this conversation is there's a fine line. And frankly, can we become more progressive and use more technology? Yes, we are very, in the commercial real estate, especially office leasing world, we are, I think, behind the times. I use something called View the Space, which is technology that I adopted about 6 years ago because a landlord said, you're going to use this, and it's changed my life. So I get it. The right technology can really make a huge difference.
Terri, in these times, like, I feel as a broker, I make solutions. we love attorneys, we love Michelle, but Michelle knows that the courts are closed right now. So as brokers, we have even a bigger use, and that's to make both parties figure out how to mitigate what's going on in these unprecedented times. So I'm not scared of technology because technology can help us, but there's still a place for getting people, both sides together. And I think brokers, we need brokers more. I mean, Michelle, you're going to have a whole lot of things, but there are going to be a lot of tenants and landlords who need to work it out before they go to court.
Well, sure, and that's something that I'm working on with my clients right now, because what I tell my tenant clients and what I tell my landlord clients is evictions and other sorts of legal relief or judicial relief provisions in their documents are pretty useless right now. Plus, don't forget, in Maryland, Governor Hogan has initiated an executive order that prohibits even commercial evictions for the probably, I think it's 15 days at a time, but it's going to continue. And then once the courts reopen, this is not going to be anyone's top priority. So, you know, I agree with you, Abby. This is a time for people to be working together. Landlords and tenants and their lenders, which is something that's not really part of today's discussion, is a symbiotic relationship. So there's no point in taking an overly aggressive position, no matter what side of the table you're on, because eventually this is going to end and we have to find a way to continue to work together.
And there are so many components to our process. I mean, we start out with a tour, and then we go to a proposal, and then we negotiate the proposal to death. And then, you know, we get an estimate on what the tenant improvements are going to cost. And we do a space plan before that, and the estimate goes out to, you know, 3 different contractors to bid on it. And then that is beat up, and everybody looks over that, and micromanages and value engineers that. Then we go to lease, and then the lease goes back and forth with comments between each side. And then you finally get to a point where the lease is signed, and then you're going into the build out of the space that involves a bunch of different parties. So it's not as you know, black and white as a lot of people might think. And I think the whole entire process, there's hand holding to get through it. Then you've got furniture people involved, and you've got cable people involved, and you've got contractors, and you've got telephone companies. So it's furniture, a carpet, drywall. It's a really extensive process that takes months if you're building out a space from a shell condition to complete. So can some of those pieces be I think, more efficient? Absolutely, but I don't know how you can make that whole process completely efficient from start to finish.
And that's, Terri, I'll make the opposite comment that you did. You were like, I'm hanging on tight to my processes. You know, the same with technology. Technology is not, it's not this magic black box that fixes everything. It's not. It doesn't make a deal better or worse. It just automates it. But you still have to come up with the deal. You know, the tenant still has to be in a space that makes sense for their business, and no amount of kind of artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, whatever it is going to make that come together.
Through that process, right?
It's still very much a human business.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we did have a more simplified lease form, whether it was like the residential or sale form, because I think any property manager who's on this call listening will say the broker has no idea what they put in the lease, right? Because how many brokers really read the lease, and or how many may read it but don't understand? So
I'm not going to comment.
I see that.
I agree.
A year in, or even 6 months. Yeah.
And that's why we have our wonderful attorneys like Michelle to make sure that if we don't understand all the aspects of the lease, that somebody is at least understanding them and going through and making comments as appropriate for our clients.
And one other question about, can I say one quick thing? If we do get virtual tours, who's going to pay for that? Is it the broker or is it the owner? Sorry.
Well, hey, I can go through with my iPhone. You know, as you can see from my background, I'm very proficient with my iPhone. But ultimately, if you want to use really good technology, it's going to come down to your landlord to pay for it. Although, Chris, you said yesterday that the technology you're using is not that expensive, although I think what we have to do is far more extensive in office towers of 30 stories when you've got, 20 to 30 vacancies. I think it's different in a multifamily situation because you're just kind of showing them, I think, an overview of the property. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, multifamily properties are pretty consistent unit by unit. You obviously can look at floor plans. And so, what I mentioned yesterday is when we have photographers go out and shoot our buildings, again, we still have some old school. A person physically goes out with a camera and takes the pictures to put our marketing materials together. It's really about $700 more to have them put together a video for that. So, I think that it isn't that big of an expense. And I would think that there's a case to be made to the property owner to say, hey, listen, whether I'm your leasing professional or one of my competitors this is something that a building owner should just have for their buildings, whether it's for marketing purposes, insurance purposes, right? You have a videographer who goes through and takes care of your spaces. It takes half a day. We're not looking to win any, Emmy awards here. We're literally just looking and being able to say, look where you are. One of the challenges in this region, it's very difficult to get aerials and drone videos just for national security reasons. I always love it when clients ask me, we have out-of-town clients who are looking at something around Fort Meade, and they're like, tell me about Fort Meade, show me an aerial. I'm like, yeah, there are no aerials of Fort Meade available. Let's be clear, national security is at risk. But there are ways, I think, even you can show an out-of-town person a market, a story. But I think it's something, again, to think about more holistically in your building. You probably should always have some videos of your space, right? Whether it's occupied or not occupied. And again, in figuring out what we do post-pandemic, proactively say, hey, landlord, let's go ahead and get some videos taken so that if we have a tenant blow out unexpectedly, we have this space ready to go. And I can be in the market with this in a matter of minutes, not weeks.
Yeah, and I think that the difference in cost between what you do and what I do is you're selling, in most cases, you're selling a property. I'm leasing, so it's something that's always churning. The spaces are always churning, and we have to keep it current.
Good. And Kristen Ernst, are you here? I see you, or I saw you in the past. And I mean, are you? And this may be going like way far into technology. I'm going to stumble over what I'm going to say, but like what Kristen Ernst is doing in like visual technology for general contractors and the BIM and the fly through and what architects are doing with Revit. I mean, like some of these fly throughs I've seen, even like what Wendy Cassini's doing at Price Modern. I mean, you can basically walk right through the space. I mean, I know we haven't all embraced that technology and it's not perfect, but I mean, just like Google Earth, I mean, you could look at a building, you can see what the building looks next to it. You can kind of get a street view. Now you don't get all of the bustling activity on the street, but I mean, I think the technology's there if we bring it all together. Again, who's going to pay for that? I'm not sure, but I feel like bits and pieces of it are already done for the project.
So Wendy, I mean, again, I'll pull a Terri and just ask a direct question. Like in putting together one of those space plans of the virtual furniture layout, like how much does that cost?
So it's a matter of who's working on the project together. If an architect or designer is already involved and a company's already dealing with it, then that's kind of just factored in what we do and how our process is. So if they're buying something separately, that's a whole different ball of wax. You know what I mean? But we do feel very strongly encouraging that technology that Kristen just said, our Bluescape technology and a 360 version of fly through and the day in the office with all the furniture in there. So it depends on the project. It depends, how the size of it as well, because if it's too small, I mean, it's going to be too hard to do, but it does take just about a week to do.
Okay.
And have you seen those costs come down to do that, right? Like as technology advances, these costs continue to come down, right?
It's a good question. I don't know about, I can't answer that in particular to see if the costs have come down, but it's just been a more, just general thing to do when you are really working with a broker. So I don't know about the cost yet. That's a great question, and I can get that answer for you.
Because bringing this all back to that, right? All of this, the point of the broker and the point of paying a broker commission, it all filters down to the landlord's bottom line, right? It's an investment that we're trying to add value to. So putting all these pieces together, what is the cost of technology? What do I lose without the human interaction versus what does the human interaction add value to my bottom line? And in commercial real estate, it seems like there is no one size fits all answer to that. It's going to depend on the type of asset and you know, so many other factors. But as technology continues to advance and create efficiencies, I think our industry needs to be a little bit better about shifting kind of along the way. And we're not.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we can certainly put more technology into effect. And frankly, again, when you're doing leasing of multi-story office buildings, you've got a lot going on. You're doing renewals, you're doing new leases. Each floor could have 3, 4, 5 tenants, and there's a lot going on. So if there's a way to make the process more efficient, I'm for it. We've just been slow to embrace efficiencies. And I think, as I said, we're getting there with some things like View the Space that's being asked by our landlords that we use it. And they go in and they actually do video the spaces. Now they're being used more as a tracking software, but there is software out there. Also, there was a company, I don't know what they're doing now, Kinglit, where they were on behalf of buildings just listing small spaces and trying to make the process more efficient, because small spaces take as much time as leasing larger spaces. So if you can have a more efficient process, and I think, Chris, back when we were at JLL, I think they had a same kind of program in place. I can't remember what it was called, but that was an attempt to make leasing small spaces more efficient by just standardizing the process. And somehow we've even gotten away from that. I guess, you know, we just go back to our roots over and over again. But, you know, I think after what we've experienced the last 3 weeks, we're going to have to step up and create some efficiencies, because we can't be dead in the water and not show spaces when we're, you know, sitting at home unexpectedly. But, you know, what might come in the future that we don't anticipate that could put us in a similar situation again, and we're not prepared. So certainly this opens your eyes to possibilities and things that you need to do to prevent business from shutting down completely in the future.
Yeah, just keep in mind, this is one of the ways that Price Modern can actually help. It's really just helping CREW right now and helping all the organizations. So if this is a way we can do that, I would be glad to step in and really help you.
Good to know.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. I made a huge mistake in the beginning of this, and Abby Glassberg is not with CBRE, she's with KLNB, so I apologize for that. And we do have 2 questions, which kind of takes us off the virtual and back into the leasing space, but we can go there for a few minutes. From Don Sangley, I'm going to read this out loud, and Don, if you want to correct me, you're more than welcome to jump off mute. How is this pause in leasing dealing with leases that are ending? Are they getting extensions? And if so, are those rates elevated or at their typical rates?
So I can jump in there, and I'm sure Abby has comments on that. So it's interesting, because this is an opportunity if you're negotiating a lease right now, lease renewal, to maybe come in and want to retrade the terms. I've heard of it happening. I've also, at this point, if you're in the process of renewing a tenant, I think you have to stay on top of it, because if a tenant is struggling in any way, shape, or form, this is an opportunity for them not to move forward to renew. And certainly if you're doing business in Baltimore City, the name of the game is keeping your tenants. And so I think this time period that we're going through these last 3 weeks, if we have any renewals that are in process, we've got to really stay on top of them so that we don't lose a tenant that is in stress. And, you know, I really have not had a lot of tenants or brokers come to me on behalf of their tenants and ask for reduction in terms in light of this. It kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I think it probably is happening. I've heard of it happening, but, you know, that's completely taking advantage of a situation. And I think a lot of people are probably choosing not to do that. or maybe just putting off a decision until we're at the end of this. I see more of that than brokers coming back to me when we have a renewal in process and saying, hey, all right, I'll get this renewal done if you give me these concessions. Alternatively, I've had landlords say for new deals that we should go after them aggressively and use this as an opportunity to put out aggressive terms to try to bring in some new business when people aren't making decisions. Abby, would you like to comment on that?
Right. I mean, this is clearly the time that the old adage, adversity doesn't bring out character, it just reveals it. So I have seen on LinkedIn a young broker I follow, not in our market, but I do follow, and he was very saying that you should be really aggressive and now's your time, tenant. But we are in this all together. The one thing I'm seeing is people are being a little bit more relaxed with notice dates. And that's giving people a little time to assess their situation and how they're going forward. So if you had to have your renewal notice by April 1st, they're saying, hey, we understand there's a lot going on. Let's look at this again in 90 days. So I'm seeing that. I've not had anybody come back to one of my landlords to really try to stick it to them. I do, in my practice is really a relationship practice. So I do some sales and some leasing of retail and office. So I am working on a new retail project that surprisingly we have gotten leases back from brand names. On another retail, we had somebody who wanted to renew, and they did let them stay current instead of increasing the rate. So I see people more working together.
Yeah, and I have my own tenants that I represent, and we're not turning around and trying to stick to the landlord, although we are waiting this out so that everybody knows where they're coming out of this after several weeks, so that they can make decisions not while we're in it, but after the fact. So we are putting some of our negotiations on hold right now. Michelle, do you want to comment on that? Because I know you do a lot of lease transactions.
Yeah, I think Michelle responded. It's not so much a question. Take it.
Yeah, it's okay. Sorry, I was having a pre-Passover planning sidebar, so I got a little distracted. But I'm kind of in the same position. It was sort of interesting. I don't know if any of you participated in the CREW Network webinar on rent abatement strategies. There was one guy there who was a landlord rep who was a total jerk. I mean, his attitude was, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to force concessions from my tenants. And I'm thinking, well, none of my large scale tenants are going to do business with you because they're just not going to put up with that. The deals that I'm working on, and this is both from a landlord and a tenant side, is very similar to what Abby was saying. It's the parties trying to come together, because on these deals, karma sucks, right? You take advantage of people now, it's going to come back to bite you eventually. And I think most people who are business people understand that. So again, we're seeing a lot of, and I in my response in the comments to Dawn's question, I said, yes, certainly with some lease extensions that I'm working on, we've tried to address some rent abatement or rent deferment issues for this period of time, in addition to the new extension. Definitely, as Abby said, we're seeing some relaxation of strict timelines. So maybe as long as there's an initial outreach and a discussion, no one's really hung up on getting something inked immediately. And I think it behooves both parties to try to come together, because if you believe that your business, as a tenant, your business is going to continue once we get through this, you're going to need some place to operate from, at least the people I'm working with. And if you're a property owner, you need tenants to fill the space. So there is, again, as I said before, a symbiotic relationship. You've got to find a way to come to work together. I am fortunate in that most of the clients I work with are not trying to stick it to the other side. They're trying to find ways to come together and work out a deal that makes sense for everybody.
I have a question.
Now, I will say, one thing that I have to put more aggressive about is checking our force majeure clauses.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we brought that up in the last CREW panel. Yep.
But
yeah.
Terri and Abby, I have a question for you guys. Are you seeing, or do you think maybe it's too early, maybe we will see, do you think landlords will now start to analyze whether a tenant is like an essential business going forward? Like, should we encounter something like this again? evaluating whether it, because our tenants that are office tenants that are essential are still up and running and paying rent versus the ones that aren't, or the ones that have asked for deferrals or abatements. Do you think that'll be something that you'll evaluate?
That is the first time I've even heard this or thought about that. And I saw Kim kind of smile when you asked that question. I don't know if she wants to comment, but I don't know how we could really make that a part of the conversation when you're.
I think it's going to impact kind of like a credit rating, right? You're a AAA credit tenant. Oh, you also happen to be a bank or a pharmacy or a biotech or whatever. I mean, I think it is going to come into play.
Okay, so when you're talking about kind of positive,
you can stay in business, and in times like this, great.
Right, like if it's quasi-retail.
Bigger problems going on. We're all sunk.
Yeah. So I think another conversation that I'd like to see is what's the effect on this. We've seen in the last couple of years quite a few trades at what will look back to be the top of the market. What effects that will have on these landlords who really thought that rates would go up, and maybe they won't go up as fast as we thought. How we go forward and how we evaluate cap rates. And this might be something from Chris's point of view too, because she does so many sales. How are they changing, and how are we looking at cap rates going forward?
Yeah, Kim, do you want to jump in on the last point, and then maybe Chris, you can jump in on the cap rate question?
I think it's really more of a continuity issue. So we have 3 tenants who are on the list of essential people. One of them has opted just to have a skeleton crew here, and the other 2 have actually more people because they're operating. But in terms of what space you have to continue to condition that space. You have to continue to service that space. So I think it's evaluating how much of your building are they going to take, and what would the impact be on your operations and your CAM moving forward.
Well, before we get to Terri, and Michelle may have to step in on this, when a landlord is asking for you to pay rent, they have to say, whether you were in the space or not, they were fulfilling their obligation.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, you'd be doing it anyway. I think it's only at an advantage for landlords right now because they don't have to operate the building to the extent that they would be operating it if the building were running at 100% capacity.
But the question is, do you need to? Because you're going to have to say to your tenant, hey, you had your people working from home. However, my building was up and operating 100%, so that you do have to pay.
Well, I had a client call me yesterday and he said, I'm an essential employee and I'm being affected because the building is not operating the way it generally operates. And can I make the landlord responsible for that? And of course, I'm not an attorney, but I said, well, it wasn't the landlord's choice to have to operate the way they're operating it. Michelle, this is more of your thing. So you can't really put it on the landlord. Now, if you need rent relief because you can't financially pay your rent, that's one thing, but you can't go after the landlord, in my opinion, during this time because they have been given a directive to pull back on how they operate the building in light of current events.
No, they weren't.
Well, but what about the tenant who's told by government order that they can't operate? It's the same thing. In fact, that is actually one thing I would tell a tenant client. If they've got a landlord insisting that rent be paid, I would want to know, okay, well, if I were to show up, is the janitorial service going to be there? Is the power turned on? Can I get into the building? Because if you're not performing, landlord, maybe that excuses to a certain extent. Now, again, lease documents say different things. And force majeure clauses typically are not helpful in terms of not paying rent, but it's absolutely something that I would be using as a defense if I were representing a tenant, that I don't have to perform if the landlord is not providing me with space that I can perform in.
Just a lot of what we're discussing is, some of it's, new. I haven't thought about it. Like going back to the question you had, Katherine, do you think about a tenant when you're leasing space, if they're considered essential or non-essential? And then to Chris's point, I guess maybe you look at, like Chris said, in terms of credit worthiness, you look at a lot of these quasi quasi-retail type of businesses like dry cleaners or the cafes that are in buildings, they can't survive if there are no tenants in the buildings to frequent their services. But I don't know how that would actually apply when you want those services anyway. You can't not provide them just because they are not essential in times like this.
And hopefully we'll never experience this ever again. We are right up against our 10:30 time, actually a little bit over. So I think this was a great conversation. There's a lot of resources out there for those of you on the call. Just to give, a shout out to a couple of our virtual, Kristen put in the comments. I don't know if you guys have the comments up on the side, but she's happy to talk about anybody, about virtual laser scanning, et cetera. And I know Wendy Cassini as well. Harkins provides those services as well, laser scanning in the virtual space. BIM technology, if that's the way that you guys want to move. But I think this was a wonderful conversation. Next Tuesday, especially for our property managers, it's going to be interesting for me as well. We're going to be talking to our commercial cleaners and what cleaning for COVID-19 means right now when they have positive cases or suspected positive cases. So I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation. And then I plan on building out the rest of the schedule with property managers and security. The conversation around buildings being empty and security being in the buildings, as well as commercial lending. We probably are going to come back to another leasing conversation later in May, because these things are just going to continue and evolve as we get further into this. So again, I thank you all for being here. Thank you so much to our panel for taking time out of your day. I hope you enjoy these, and I will see you next Tuesday via Zoom.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Kristen.
Yeah, bye.
This
Bye, everybody.
YouTube channel as well.
Thanks.